So for most of you, you know who I am. For some of you, I am new. So I'm going to just do a little brief introduction, and then we'll jump right into the Magic Monday. So my name is Cindy Mattingly. I'm the owner of Healing Way Center, and I've been doing body work. I'm an occupational therapist and energy work for 40 some odd years. So long time. I was raised on a farm. So nature and elements and all those things are very familiar. But the key piece here is, again, it's that same thing some of you have heard me say, I thought everybody connected with fairies and elements and things of that sort. So this is kind of fun to be able to share with you my experiences. So that the place we're going to start is, I'm going to do a little bit of a dialogue to give you an idea of my experiences with fairies. And then I'll do a screen share with a handout. And that handout I will send to you as soon as we finish our call. So you might want to take notes. And then once the screen share is complete, what I'll do is stop the screen share and take questions. So that gives you kind of an idea of how our hour is going to be spent. So fairies are part of what's called the elemental realm or kingdom, if you will. There's lots of words. You'll see dimension, realm, kingdom. Those are all just words to say of vibration. So one of the things that it says on this handout that many of you have seen or heard me say is everything is energy. The only thing that's different is the frequency. So that's a really important thing, because all of us are energy, but each one of us have a different frequency. So the elementals are all qualities or vibrations of the elements: fire, water, air, earth. Those are the four classic. There are, like in acupuncture, they have the 5-element theory. In some of the different other dharmas and belief systems, they'll have a 5th element. Like I do polarity, and polarity has 5 elements. But we're going to be talking about the elemental kingdom or realm, so we're going to stick with the 4 at this time. So this is an important characteristic because each one of the fairies will have characteristics of the vibration of those elements. So when I'm asking or talking about the questions or the giving you a connection, it's important that you keep in mind that each one of the elements and the fairy that's connected to that will have a different, if you will, personality, but definitely a different frequency. That's what you want to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm going to start the screen share. Here we go. Okay. So notice what I wrote at the top of after the paragraph. It says fairy relationship etiquette. This is the fairies, or actually the elements in general, really expect us as humans to be respectful. And if we're not, they're not going to connect and they're not going to show themselves to you. So I'm going to tell my story about my own exposure and experiences with fairies. So like I said, I've been doing body work, energy work, but energy work a long time, 20, 25, 30 years, somewhere in there. And I was on a retreat on a ranch out in California. And the instructor said, well, tomorrow we're going to go to a fairy glen. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So we hike out to this place, and it's in a very cool area. And we sat inside of a ring of trees and we meditated. So that was a really important, it wasn't in anything fancy meditation. We sat down, we did some breath work, and we meditated. And then she invited all of us to get up and wander around the area and explore the fairy glen. I was like, okay. I thought, well, I wonder what I'm looking for. And she walks over to me and she goes, hold your hand out. And I held my hand out like this. And she went to this like leaf and she picked up, it looked like a little ball of energy. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And she laid it in my hand. And I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, and nothing changed. And I thought, that's interesting. So I put my hand down, and as I lifted my head, the veil that you read or they talk about dropped. And the entire ridge line, the whole side of this hill was fairies. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And they were all looking at me, going about their business, moving, different sizes, different, some of them looked like they were dressed in clothes. I mean, it was a really, I just was, needless to say, speechless, and watched it, watched it, watched it. And then when I dropped my head to see if this fairy that was in my hand was still there and lifted my head, they were gone. So when I told the instructor, she said, well, the fairies allowed you to see because they trusted you. So that was a really very powerful thought about, I had no expectation, I had no idea, and yet it didn't look anything like what I thought it was, except the idea that the veil dropped and I saw the entire fairy realm there, the fairy glen there. So would we see that here, say in the United States, or would you see that where you go to some of the other places on the planet that have a lot of connection to fairies? It would depend. And so what I've done is I've outlined what the etiquette is, what the fairies have told me, what I've read, my experience. I kind of put all that together in this handout. So the first place I would say is you need to know, how do you read or pick up energy? What's your special way? Because I believe everybody has, I think everyone's intuitive. I believe everyone has senses that are really sensitive. And so will you see? Most people want to see, but I don't find that that's usually the first place. I usually find that it's either maybe they feel it in their body, they have they hear something, they know that there's fairies around, there's the claircognizance. So you want to really evaluate and discover what is your way. Like I said at the beginning, I thought everybody heard the animals talk or the fairies and saw them. I thought everyone did. And when I found out that wasn't so, I was like, well, why not? And that's why, especially in Magic Mondays, I want to share, because I think everyone can. I think it's not restricted to special people, because I don't see myself as special, or anybody that I know that is very intuitive. So it's more about you believing and accepting yourself with your own unique frequency. So that's number one. You need to figure out or discover what is your strongest intuitive sense. So that's the first step, because how are you going to know that they're there unless you're really paying attention to your own way that you take in energy. So the next is the elemental aspect. If you are sitting on the ground, you want to be really clear about what elemental energy are you wanting to connect to. So are you sitting on the earth and you're expecting to connect with an earth fairy? Or are you sitting next to water? Where are you? Because it's about knocking on the right door, saying, hi, I'm very curious about you. So it can be air, it can be the fire. So all of them, and I'm going to talk about different things that I do to cultivate my own, and then hopefully that will be helpful to have those examples. So the next thing is, of course, meditation. You have to quiet your own mind to be able to hear, see, feel them. So that becomes a very important way. So as an example, every morning, first thing in the morning, I get up, I make myself a cup of tea, and then I sit outside on my deck and I'm quiet. I just sit and be quiet with the sounds of nature, appreciating the elements, things of that sort. That's one of the ways of appreciating the fairies. So that gives you an idea. The other one is to have a book of fairy tales and read one and think how interesting it would be to meet Tinkerbell or Thumbelina or any of the ones that you've seen in different fairy tales. They all have different names, they all have different personalities, but it's all about frequency and what is your curiosity, and then what kind of fairy tales have you read? Maybe you've not read any of them. Maybe it's, if you want to connect with fairies, you have to have an idea of, wonder what it would be like. Many people have seen TV programs. Since everyone I think on the call today is female, everyone's probably seen or watched shows around being a princess. What would it be like to be a princess? Well, you would watch a show, Cinderella or one of the others. So this is the same kind of idea. You have an imagination around the qualities of what a fairy might be like. And my experience is that it's more different than you can imagine. So you don't want to lock in and say, oh, I want to see this, but being open to whatever they're willing to show you, whoever that, whatever element you're looking at, whatever fairy energy you're hoping to connect with. So the fourth one, which is like, should be probably number one, is fairies are very able to read human energy. So if you're not being respectful and say you want to trap one, guess what? They already know, and they're not going to show you anything. But if you, just as though they were an animal and you want, or a child that you want to cultivate a relationship with, you want them to learn to trust you. So that's what they're looking for, is that kind of respect. So I gave some examples here. Sweets, like unwrap a hard candy and leave it in a particular place in your yard, on your balcony, wherever it is that you are. And if you're always, and you say that, okay, I'm leaving this for the earth fairies, for the air fairies. And then what that does is it tells the elements and the fairy energy that what you're trying to do is cultivate a relationship. And you're letting them come to you. Crystals, needless to say, are fantastic. Those are really wonderful ways because I love shiny. So you notice the earrings that I have on tonight, today, they're very shiny and reflective. They're my fairy earrings. That's basically what I call them. This particular crystal, it's a quartz crystal, but it's been lasered to give a very particular color. So again, the fairies might not like the fact that the quartz has been altered, but they might really enjoy the color. So it's those kinds of things that you want to be very respectful. Fairy houses and rings, you don't have to necessarily go out and buy a fancy fairy house. You can just, as you're walking along in the woods, or you can gradually put together a fairy house, and they're going to appreciate that a great deal. When I go hiking, usually in Maine every year for a couple of weeks, we're walking along trails and I'll see the bottom of a tree that looks just like the opening to a house. And it might have a small plant growing next to the door, and then it looks literally like somebody's tiny home. Very important. So you can create one, they can be spontaneously made. You can make rings. So for instance, you could, if you had a garden, you could take a ring of stones, and then that might be where you leave your sweet candy or your crystal as an offering to them. Statues, you can get the little bitty statues. Those are very available. And then you can get the yard ornament ones that are fairies. And then the fairies love when the human is treating the animals well. So that's why I wrote bird feeders here. If you have any way to feed the animals, whether it be the birds or the other animals. So this time of year here in New England, squirrels, all the other animals are being fed also. I have more squirrels than I do birds sometimes. So now, underneath all of that are the things for you to consider to connect. You want to be asking yourself these questions. So the first one is how will you be able to connect? And that's all about intuition. How are you going to know that there's this very subtle energy trying to connect with you? And that's a great question, because if you're aware, for instance, I'm very clairaudient. So I will hear like the flutter, like a wing, and I'll think, oh, that must be, a fly, a dragonfly or whatever, but nothing's around me, and yet I hear it. So those gives you kind of an idea of, oh, I need to be quiet. They're trying to communicate something. And then talking about which elemental realm, if you're trying to connect for the first time, if you're wanting to talk to a water fairy and yet there's no water around, so you take your step by step. If you're really aware of, let's say, feeling in your body, you go, okay, so you're going to ask for that realm. Let's say you're doing water. You would like for it to communicate, and you're sitting near a body of water, a pond, a river, even a small stream. And then the big thing is going to be, are you really ready? Did you meditate? Have you cleared your mind? Are you grounded? Are you open? Are you clear? Because again, they're going to be able to go, wow, so-and-so's mind is so busy, it's too noisy. They're not going to be able to hear or see or feel anything I do. And then, did you make an offering? Did you bring something to say, thank you, hi, my name is? And then they're going to be asking, can we trust you? Are you going to treat us with respect? Do you already treat the nature, the animals, the plants with respect? Because they're going to know that. So for instance, one of the things is recycling. If you're a recycler, they're going to love you because you're trying to take care of the planet, right? Isn't that what it's all about? And then one of the other things is looking at the time. When do you try to connect with them? So they usually are coming or going, if you will, when things are shifting. So when I get up early in the morning, it's hardly even light. So as the sun comes up, that's when they're going to show up. So I have hummingbird feeders. And so sometimes I'm looking at the hummingbird feeder and going, what is that? It's too dark still. And it's not very big. It's not as big as, you know, the hummingbirds, and they're not even that big. So you're paying attention to the kind of shifts or changes that are different. So what I'm going to do is stop the screen share and then see if there are questions. Nobody has any questions? No, you already knew all this stuff.
I have a question, Cindy.
Yeah.
You said like how, and I get this, but I always think I'm having like getting bugs in my ear. I get that fluttering. Like just yesterday, walking my son, I felt like a huge bug was by me. So it was just kind of spinning my mind that you're just talking about this. But what message would you get? Like you had said about maybe they have a message. Like, what would their message pertain to, or like how would you? Is there a communication back and forth, or is it just kind of like a respecting of existence?
Well, it's all of the above. So if you work with the elements, so because of the work I do, I have shamanic training. They work with the elements. The Tibetan training, they work with the elements. So it's really when they communicate, sometimes they're just wanting me to pay attention, right? Pay attention to whatever's happening. Or if you don't have an established relationship with them, then what they're looking to do is to maybe say, you know, kind of like pull your hair. Well, hello, wake up, we're here. So it's really one of those things where there could be a multitude of things, but usually they're around. We just don't necessarily pay attention to them because they are so subtle, right? We're in this physical realm. What do we think? It has to be like in our face. And really, you have to get quiet to pay attention to the air fairies. Because a really great example is if you have wind chimes and the wind chimes are moving and there's no wind, the fairies are talking. I mean, you know, the first couple of times those kinds of things happen, I was like, okay, so do I tell people this? That there's no wind outside and my chimes are ringing? The answer is yes, because I'll create a fairy group, right? We'll have our own fairy community. But it's really because my world is about energy. The fairies are just an energy. And I don't mean just, but they're part of the elemental world and how we're put together. All those elements are creation. So it's a way for creation to speak to us in a very specific way, because our minds are just always zooming, right? They're just go, 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 go. So there's a lot of different messages they may have for you. That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, because it's like, who do you go and tell that you're connected to, the fire spirits? If you're a shaman, they're not going to pay any attention to it. If you say, I really do very well in acupuncture with, but the interesting thing is, should you? Yeah, you can. You can ask. You can ask back and forth. It's like, what are they here to teach you? That's a big thing for me. Is I tried. So when I first learned, when I was in, training to be a shaman, one of the things that I thought was the most fascinating is how respectful you were to the spirits and the different realms that you can go in. And I just loved that. I thought that was just precious, because all of nature deserves that kind of respect. And unfortunately, it's not always paid to nature, to the animals, to the plants. And it was that was part of my teaching way back when. And so it's gone, and everything I've learned has stayed in alignment with about paying attention and being respectful. So about 20 years ago, I met my husband, and he was living in this great house, and he had roses along his driveway. And he was like, I don't really like those roses. I'm going to tear them out. I was just like, no, the fairies will be upset. He was like, what? Needless to say, he's an IT guy. He thought I was, but of course I was right. And he left them. He left the roses alone. So it's that kind of information that opens up for other people. And sometimes you might see, especially at, I think, dusk, like later in the day, you might see the fairy lights idea, and there's no June bugs. That's what we call them. I'm from the South, so, Southern United States. It's like they have those fireflies. You catch them. Well, that's, they may not be fireflies. They might be fairies. And you just pay attention to that, what the pattern is, to think, oh, look at this. A firefly, no, it's a fairy who's lighting up just for me, so that I start paying attention. And then once you discover that possibility and pay attention more, then it happens more often, because now they have your attention, which is wicked cool. I mean, my idea of their job is, not only do they help take care of their element and nature, but they also interact with us if we're on the same page. If we're not on the same page, they're probably not going to show their self to you. But you're going to have a sense. Many times people have a sense, wow, there must be something going on here. It feels buzzy. And yet you're in the middle of nowhere. So it's paying attention to that, which becomes really important. So looking at how you bring in, and how do you connect with energy in general? What do you call it? How do you know it's happening? Do you get a chill up the back of your neck? What's your way? And then thinking about, where am I? Oh, I'm near a lake. Oh, okay, so, but I'm not, it doesn't feel wet. It doesn't feel flowy. It feels fluttery. So fluttery, I would go, oh, okay, well, maybe that's an air spirit. So that gives a, she's asking a buzzing sound every night. Could that be them? Sure. You ask them. This will give you an example. When I wrote up to do this class, I had a dream. And my dream was that I was standing on an edge of the lake, and I could feel the wind in my dream. And so I'm standing on earth, looking at the lake, feeling the air, and the sun comes out in my dream. I was like, okay. And when I write up that paragraph that says connect with fairies, I didn't really have an idea of what I really wanted to share. I just knew that it was important. So that felt to me like the elementals spoke to me and said, this is how we want you to share this information. So that came in. So dreams are clairvoyance, those kinds of specific dreams. So that gives you an idea of what to pay attention to. Yeah, I know. That's really, oh, thank you. You're welcome. Good. Any other questions? There's a couple of head noddings going on. I like that. Yeah. So everybody's going to run out, get their sweet treats, their shiny stuff. They're going to get some fun earrings. And when they want to connect with the fairies, they have their little bag of tricks, right? That's important. Well, they'll appreciate it. I finally convinced my husband to go out and buy a butterfly bush because it attracts the butterflies and all that. And the fairies, they like those fragrant smells so that'll make them very, of course, he's probably going to wonder what's happening when I start hanging up the crystals out of the trees. He'll be happy, right? Because we'll have more fairies, more blooms, more happiness. That's what it's all about, right? Well, yeah. Good deal. So any other questions? Because a lot of people do ask questions like, are they mischievous? Do they have a personality? Right? So what would you imagine like a fire fairy would be like? She or he might have a little bit of an attitude, right? They're very fiery, if you will. So those are you look at, okay, what would water? That might be someone that goes with the flow. What about air? Moving fast, right? Zoop, zoop, zoop. So you have to be really quiet to notice an air fairy. And they have different names for all of them, and you can find that either online or in other books, but the elemental is the like big umbrella, and then the next step down would be the 4 elements, and then they call them different things, but it's all elemental. And then fairy is more connected to, we know them, they look a certain way, right? It looks like a Tinkerbell, but that's not necessarily true. Animals have fairies, plants have fairies, and they look different.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we humans usually ask Is it a boy or a girl? So what about the elementals? Fairies, we usually, at least they are depicted like rather female entities,
Right.
whereas fire spirits are mostly would think of fire spirits as male, and maybe they don't have any such polarity at all.
Uh,
I just wonder why people, because there are a lot of artists who either saw them or imagined them, or in a fairy tale, you would say she or he.
mhm.
Very often, the elementals that are connected to the earth, actually, they can be both female and
That's correct. They
male.
can be androgynous.
But for instance, um, water spirits also can be androgynous or can be both. So any ideas about that? I'm just curious.
Well, if you're looking at it through the elemental world, and if we chose a particular, let's say air, does air have a feminine quality? Not female, as in the sex of female, but
Right.
a
Yeah.
feminine quality. So if you had a light breeze just gently stroke your face, that would definitely qualify as a feminine quality of the air spirit. But is there such a thing as a masculine quality of air? Well, yeah.
Yeah.
If you've ever been through a hurricane or a tornado, or, it's got direction, because direction's a masculine quality. It's got force, things like that. So what you're asking is, absolutely, we depict it a certain way, but what's true is, I would, based on what I have seen with my own eyes, uh, some of them were very androgynous looking. Some of them were very feminine looking with a little skirt. Some of them looked like a tomboy, somebody. So they are all the qualities, again, of the energy, just like you would expect the same qualities to be, say, of us. Some of us look very feminine, some of us look very not, some of us look this, some of us, again, it's all about the frequency, but androgynous until maybe, now this I don't know the answer to, but maybe it's androgynous until something needs to shift. Maybe like right now, we've got a rainstorm coming and the wind's starting to pick up and things of that sort. So as it's shifting the weather pattern, then the air spirits are participating. And then, sometimes you have the rainstorm and it's just a straight downpour, no wind. So the only one talking at that time was the water spirit. That was a good question, Boriana.
I've never seen them, but I think I've been in touch most of my life.
Mm. Well, most people want to see, but that doesn't necessarily, that might not, the harder you want to do something, the more it's not going to be available to you. It's like,
I didn't try to
no,
see.
I'm not saying you, I'm saying people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
I,
now
I,
that they are around,
yeah, I started out very clairaudient, and then all the other senses have come along, with clairvoyance being the last one to really get very rich. So when I'm looking at somebody's energy, I can see their and things around them and what's going on. I have dreams, things of that sort. So everybody has their ability to tune into their intuition It's, again, not because I'm anything special. It's really all of us have this ability. We just have to say, oh, isn't that interesting? The fairies talk to me. I'm like, don't they talk to everybody? Because they do, if we're listening, unless you're a bad person, right? If you're not taking care of your animals and your plants and you're not being out in nature, they're not going to necessarily talk back to you, right? But the more awareness you have about honoring nature and then honoring the different elements, the more they're going to connect and tune in, and you'll have more experiences, especially if you put little gifts out, leave them offerings. So I know, it's like, oh, how fun. So some of the books that I would recommend, I didn't put that on there, but Ted Andrews has a great one. It's called Enchantment of the Fairy Realm. He has lots of meditations in there. And so you can take a meditation that he's written, put it on your phone in your own voice, read it to yourself, if you will, and you know, there you are. You're already preparing yourself to connect with. His is really, and he's got a little more, I want to say he's more like scientific in it. He's broken them down in realms. And so if you're into that, this one is great too. It's called the Fairy House Handbook. It is Liza, Liza Walsh. In the back of it, she also has like a website that was really great. I don't remember where I found this, but I was on vacation one time. I was like, I got to buy it. Tracy, Tracy, and Barry Kane, Kane. You put their names in, they come up with a whole bunch of fairy, stuff. And then the other books I have are from Doreen Virtue, Fairies 101 and Healing with Fairies. So, I mean, the ones that I liked the best are the Fairy House and the one by Ted Andrews. They're more my kind of thing, but the ones from Doreen Virtue are fantastic too.
She disavows them now.
I'm sorry?
She disavows them now.
Right.
But
Hey,
it doesn't mean that she didn't see.
right. Change is change. Everybody has to change and do their thing. It's all good. Right? The most important thing is you have your experience, whatever that is. Any other questions? Cool. So I will be going on a 2-week vacation. So I'll be off of Magic Mondays for 2 weeks. So I think the next one is the 14th of September. And September is all about animals.
About animals.
It's all about animals. And then October we'll be back to humans. I haven't decided, or it hasn't been shown to me, what October will, but if you have thoughts about that, things that you're interested in, you can send me an email. Or I think some of you guys came through Facebook, so please feel free. And I'll send this out, and the recordings for this are now they're on YouTube. So this one will probably be there in, I would say, give it a couple of days. I'm just going to stop the recording because they don't need all the housekeeping.